Okay, good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are. It's March 25th, and this is another of our bi-weekly SIG CLI meetings. My name is Maciej, and I'll be your host today. I don't have any particular announcements, other than I do hope you are all great and, safe, and, all the best to everyone, and I hope you will be secure and safe in the next couple of weeks in the tough times.
I think we're due for a bug scrub next week, actually.
We are. I was thinking about it earlier today, actually, because, and I thought that we did one already in March. Did we not?
I don't think so.
Yeah, we did not. The last one was from February 19th, just scrolling through the agenda. So yeah, definitely. It is about time to have one, and that will be like literally the last possible time. Yeah, it'll be even further than that. Okay, so definitely next week we'll do a bug scrub call. Thanks for the reminder, Eddie. And Eddie will be organizing that one. So Eddie, can you make sure to send out an invite to SIG CLI so that people don't forget about that one?
Yeah, do you know how we get a recurring calendar invite sent out? Like when you join the SIG, you get invited to the meetings?
Um,
I have not been able to figure that out.
Wait, you mean how to make it so you automatically get the thing added to your calendar when you join the SIG?
yes.
Invite the group to the event. That should make it happen.
That's definitely what I've been doing, I think. Oh, it's not been recurring though. Okay, all right, I'll make it recurring then.
Cool. Okay. So I'll change the nothing to bug scrub next week. Perfect.
Is that next week or next meeting?
Next week. We
Okay.
were doing the bug scrub in the other week than the usual meetings.
Okay, cool. I'd forgotten that. Thank you.
Okay, with that out of the way, I think we can jump to the main topics. And I'm giving the floor entirely to Philip because we were to talk about customized most of the time.
I think correct me if I'm wrong here, I think we were going to do a quick demo of QE at the beginning and then do the bug
that
scrub?
as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Nick, do you want to take that over?
Sure, sounds good. Share. Sorry, this is my first time sharing, so I have to grant macOS permissions. Maybe give me a few minutes. I have to grant right permissions here.
Take your time.
I have to restart Zoom, so I'll see you in a few seconds. Maybe Phil, you can start while I give me a few minutes. I'll be right back.
Can I get just a feeling for the room? Does everyone know how to raise hands on this thing? Because I don't actually. Oh, there it is. It's in the raise hands. Just like how many people are here for the talking about vars and customize and declarative configuration? All right, a couple of us. Great. Is there anything else? Like, there's actually a pretty large attendee list. Is there anything else people are here specifically for besides that? All right, cool. Nick, do you want me to introduce that topic? Like, how much time do you need?
Oh, maybe just 5-7 minutes. I mostly wanted to get people up to date with our progress, but also to maybe stimulate some discussions about how we all can be thinking about graphical experiences for Kubernetes. So just 5 or 7 minutes would be fine.
Okay. So after this, sorry, You need 5 or 7 minutes to do the demo. You don't need 5 or 7 minutes to figure out how to share your screen, right?
No, I think I'm ready to go.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, let's see if this works. How does that look?
Looks right.
Okay, great. So just a 20-second background. So KUI is a project for allowing us hopefully more easily and readily to take existing CLIs and give them graphical enhancements. And so, for example, here I am in KUI, and we're running KUI now in a kind of terminal replacement mode. There's alternate modes, but I'll start with this one. So it has its own little terminal. I issue Kubernetes kget pods, and I get back a table as you'd expect, but the table has some decoration enhancements like badges, but it also has clickability. So if I click on one of the pods, I get some additional details about the components of that pod. I can go from the raw YAML to more wrap-up, roll-up kind of views that are trying to summarize the information that they're in. We also have the ability to take some of this information and cast it into a more graphical form from the standpoint of usage. So you're probably all familiar with the output of kubectl help. And so we can also decorate that. So here I'm going to, we have a couple ways of getting there. You can either go through the settings menu or just type K, and you'll be able to see some enhancements there as well. So here, what we've done here is we've basically screen scraped the raw output of kubectl and just recast it into a graphical form. And so I can then start traversing some of this information. I can go down, and if I want to view the help for create or expose, I click, and I've navigated down to the next level. And just to repeat the story here, there's nothing, we haven't really invented anything here from the standpoint of the content. All the content is exactly the content you would see from the normal kubectl command line. All we've done is we've scraped it into a graphical HTML kind of form. But now I can begin to navigate some of this more complex help kind of structure, both from the standpoint of parceling out the sort of the piece parts of each individual help screen, but also begin to start navigating between the elements of the command hierarchy. So we can enhance that as well. So I'm hoping that we can start thinking about how we can even take this a step further. So to really help new users understand not just sort of the basics of Kube, but to have maybe more live examples or anything you guys might think of how we could enhance this even to the next level. What would you want to add to these kinds of help screens that you weren't thinking about before because you were limited to an ASCII context? Could we have even more deep connections there? There's also ability when you create or delete resources, we can have some sort of live feedback as to their state. What we're not doing yet are things like having really deeper, more meaningful connections with Kustomize. So for example, we can, right now, if I do a apply-k, it just shows the raw output of Kustomize, but there's nothing that's fancy, nothing fancied up about it, nothing clickable, it's all just raw text. And so that's a case where, I think hopefully if you can start thinking in these terms of how we can cast what we currently have in kubectl as raw text, and if we can think about just itemizing, you don't have to do any work, but if you're going to think about itemizing the possibilities of what you might think about enhancing the experience from beyond text to a more navigational and graphical kind of context. And that could be just simple tables with clickability, but it could also be, in the case you saw previously, of having more of a form-based presentation to the data. This form-based presentation is still new. It's so new, in fact, that it doesn't respond to font zooming, so there's a bug there. So form-based presentations, this could also be presentations, maybe in the case of Kustomize, where there's sort of multi-part views where you can link together the Kustomize specification to the base layers and having more graphical connections, But the idea here is that hopefully with this kind of framework underlying it, all these kinds of discussions we can have more readily, and we can toss these ideas around and make progress very quickly. The framework will allow us to add new commands, for example, or decorate existing commands in an enhanced fashion. So I just wanted to sort of get that, you know, in your guys' thought process, so we can start opening up issues. If you guys think about any ways we can enhance this experience for your stuff or for Kubernetes in general.
How much of this is hard coded to kube control versus just any Cobra command?
Yeah. So the way we've approached it for now is that we, for example, have enhancements for kubectl, for the IBM Cloud CLI, and in each of those cases, the tack we've taken is that you leverage the existing underlying CLI, and your job as the CUI interface is to digest that output of that raw CLI and decorate it in some way. So we're not tapping at all into anything implicit with, for example, the underlying API to, for example, for Kubernetes or for IBM Cloud or for Google Cloud. We're just using the CLI and OC in a purely unadulterated fashion, which has some limitations, but it has a lot of benefits for now.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's really just sort of screen scraping. So all the help stuff I showed you, it's just a matter of leveraging all the great work you guys have done of make the fact that the kubectl output is so easy to parse. The job was actually relatively straightforward. Helm, I know there's wars here, but Helm is, so we have Helm as well, and we have OC, and the Helm output is pretty good. It's in some cases that the parsability is a little bit less so. The reason why this environment subsection is not pulled out to a top level subsection on the left is because in all of the cases, they put a single new line between the title of the subsection and the content, but for some reason, Helm in one case put two new lines, so we weren't able to parse it properly. So Helm is definitely less consistent than kubectl, but it's pretty good. That's all the general principle of this, of finding some sort of common cases, common patterns that can be easily parsed.
Do you have the format that one would need to emit data in, like published, so that anyone writing their own CLI could make sure that it takes advantage of this as much as possible?
So I think that's definitely something we should have. Right now, the idea is that if it emits tables that look like Kubernetes tables, you're guaranteed to be easily parsed. That's more or less the way it is now. For IBM Cloud, their CLI has a --JSON option, which is kind of like the -O JSON, -O YAML for Kubernetes. And so even though the IBM Cloud tables were hard to parse, we just, in that case, just delved down to the raw information. Kubernetes has the server-side printing, which complicates matters. We want to leverage that as much as possible. So that's why we just parse the tables in their current form so that we can leverage whatever server-side printing the CRDs might have. But I think that's something we should be thinking about. So for example, for customize, there's sort of a principle here for generally whenever you're applying, whenever you're creating or deleting resources, we had to do quite a bit of finagling to make that work, because you can, for example, do for both kubectl apply and kubectl apply -k, the output is in both cases fairly similar. It's text about what was changed, but not describing the nature of the change or the status of the change. Whereas in CUI, we've made it so that when you say an apply without -k, we actually respond with a status table, which is showing the ongoing status of the deployment of the various resources. And so that's a case where if we can think about that a little more deeply about how we can have the notion of the status of a deployment more accessible, that's a case where maybe we could pursue that a bit with customize to see how we could flesh that out a little more.
I mean, that output that you're showing for apply, it's basically a default output coming from the printers from like literally every single kubectl command. So whether you're doing apply, create, run, anything, in the majority of cases, the default printer will kick in, and that will say the resource and the action that happened to it. So that will be either created or updated, edited, whatever, most of the time. There is an option for you to request a more detailed output, as with get. So basically, all of the printers are similar for all of the commands across the entire kubectl.
Okay, that's good to know. So I think that there's an example where when we do a create -f as opposed to -k, you can see how the table responds with the table, and you can see the blinking status of that particular, the status of that creation. So I think that's just a gap we can probably pretty easily fill with apply -k as well. But there's definitely some deeper issues there that we have to work through. For example, if you're applying a whole subdirectory, you can do that with an apply -f, but we're not currently getting the status, the recursive status of all of those resources. So in the short term, I think that we're going to be, I think customize seems like a pretty low-hanging fruit for us to be looking at next. So any thoughts you have there, whether it's forms or anything that you guys have, I definitely welcome you to be opening up issues. This is our current repo. It's still hosted underneath IBM/CUI. We're going to work on rehosting that, and hopefully in the next couple of weeks. We just have to arrange who the owners are and the contributors and all that. So hopefully in the near future, this will shift over to Kubernetes hosted repo, but this is where it is for the next week or two.
Great. Yeah, let's follow up on customize. We're doing some work there, like PRs are starting to come out, which might make this simpler by attaching metadata so that programs such as CUI can identify things like, oh, this was a name prefix and it was inserted by this file or that sort of stuff. So there might be more information there you can take advantage of soon.
Yeah, that sounds great. I also want to introduce Meng Ting, who's on the call. She's in our group. So yeah, she's been very instrumental in getting all this working.
Nick, that was awesome. Did you, last week you said you were having trouble with spawning the plugin and packaging it. What's that look like now?
Yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. Who was that talking? Sorry.
It's Eddie.
Oh, Eddie. Yeah. Thank you for reminding me of that. I can give a demo. Let me just give a quick little, forgot to mention, that's sort of the most important part. Thank you. So my mind. So everything I've shown you so far is sort of with a terminal replacement mode, which I'm going to be the first to admit for a desktop kind of scenario isn't the most attractive thing, but for a browser-based deployment, this is pretty nice. In fact, there's an IBM product which has hosted this in a browser-based hosted environment. And there, of course, you need a terminal replacement because there is no terminal running in a browser. But for most local developers, they're not going to want to replace their ZSH or whatever fancy, crafted local development experience. And I'm one of those people. So we can address that as well via crew and the kubectl plugin mechanism. And so we have what we call a kind of a pop-up mode. So here I am, just make the fonts a little bigger, running just in my standard macOS terminal. And you can see we can sort of very quickly pop up a window in response to certain commands. And now I can keep this window as a permanent sort of fixture in my environment. Or if I'm happy with the result of this, then I can do all the standard, navigational stuff I was doing before. If I'm done with that task, I can close it out and be back to my normal CLI experience. Or if I want to keep it around and sort of riff on that and issue other related commands, you can sort of stick in that environment. So this is what we call the pop-up client, which you can see it as the bottom input kind of experience as opposed to a standard terminal where the input and output are intermixed. And so this, you see I did a kubectl CUI. And so the investigations we had done 2 weeks ago, I tried to make it so that we could just basically put the CUI Electron app itself, the binary, have it be the plugin. And it turns out that doesn't work just on macOS, because on macOS, it turns out that you can't do deep sim linking down to the Mac OS app because there's some built-in dependencies in Electron or in Chromium, I'm not sure where, that assume that you're basically hard linked into that location. And that wasn't the fault of Crew, that wasn't the fault of kubectl, that's just the fault of Electron or Chromium. So that's the short answer to your question, Eddie, that it turns out that it's our fault or someone's underneath us, but certainly not kubectl's fault. And so for the time being, I think we're just going to have to deal with having a super small wrapper script, at least for macOS, to work around that problem. But the good news is that it's a tiny little wrapper script, basically. And that wrapper script will let us then let Crew have whatever symlinks it wants. We should be pretty good to go from the symlinking perspective. So that was a relatively nice, although not the ultimate solution, but a pretty nice solution to it. From a Crew installation standpoint, we still have, I know it's been on my to-do list for a while now, but so Crew currently does not support, for many good reasons, unzipping tarballs that include symlinks. And for Linux and Windows, that's okay. I can for macOS. macOS uses symlinks all over the place for its application bundles. And so we're going to have to figure out, we could either work very diligently to update Crew to satisfy all the symlink security problems, which is possible, but I think it's definitely require a lot of diligence. So we need to either do that work, or we need to figure out an alternate solution, which might just be, for now, if you want CUI, just curl download CUI and symlink it in. Then we could at least have a short-term answer to that, short of fixing up Crew to handle symlinks, which is a scary proposition given all the security holes that have been found there.
Great. All right, time check. We're about halfway through the meeting. Should we move on to customize? Great. Maciej, do you want to moderate?
I'll leave it up to you this time.
All right, sounds good. Sorry, there's something's printing dinosaur pictures in my office here. So to get, I guess maybe the best way to get started is have someone who is here to participate in the discussion start sharing kind of how they view the needs and what they're looking for.
Hey, this is Matt. I can speak to, I think, part of why I came last time asking some questions. My team working on the Airship project is interested in leveraging Kustomize for all the great things it does, and for also probably doing things like taking advantage of some of the more advanced plugins that have been getting created recently around replacement and substitution. And as we've been integrating with Kustomize and starting to keep more tabs on the development of the project, we've seen a lot of work going on some things that from an outside perspective seem kind of parallel to the bulk of customized functionality around the config subcommand and functions in addition to plugins and those sorts of things. So we kind of wanted to just understand a little bit where the Kustomize team sees the trajectory of these moving parts heading in the future, so that we can align to that appropriately. And we can dive into other sort of more specific topics too around substitution kinds of things. But I think the main thing we were interested in is just understanding where everything's going in Kustomize land.
Yeah, that's great. I think some stuff is more exploratory than others. So anything being developed out of config, I think it's at the stage where we're trying to explore the primitives that might make sense holistically across SIG CLI. A lot of that work is derived from experience both on coup control and customize. So for instance, like the setters and substitutions are really close to coup control setters, much more so than they are to anything in customize. But understanding but at the same time, they operate against configuration rather than remote resources. So they're have that bit of sort of customized philosophy. I think some of the things we're learning about those explorations are that folks are typically trying to build a system, and they're going to have a lot of different needs, and it's usually fitting into whatever their organization's process is, right? There's other stuff going on. There's a CI/CD system. Maybe you have automated deployments. Maybe you don't. Maybe you have one team that develops like the blueprints or like the way to write applications for your organization, and everyone copies those and then doesn't really change them that much. Or maybe everyone's writing it from scratch, or maybe you're generating it from Java. Like there's something called Decorate, I think someone just showed me, which is like generating configuration directly from annotations on code. I'm sure other languages have the same. So there's lots of different ways folks are doing stuff. And one thing I think we've kind of observed is that a lot of the feature requests, I shouldn't say a lot, but some class of feature requests for Kustomize are trying to make it their system, right? And that it's like, okay, we need some way of pulling the image that we just built and substituting it in just in time, right? And so like a request would be, well, how do I make Kustomize pull the image from the environment or some other source and plug it in to like have Kustomize natively support that thing, right? And the need is definitely there. Like we totally want to support those workflows because everyone has them. However, making Kustomize work with every one of those workflows directly, I think it means it won't work it's either going to become very complicated as it tries to support kind of every sort of system. And so what we're starting to explore is what if we just kind of keep the Kustomize API as it is largely and explore before launching into saying, okay, we're going to solve this directly in Kustomize by introducing a new concept here, like pull image from environment or something like that. What if we look at what can we build that would compose with Kustomize and kind of keep the layers the way they are and not expand the scope of necessarily what Kustomize is doing. And so the general problem, right, is how do I substitute information from my environment into my configuration? And if you view Kustomize as just more configuration, it's just a way of representing configuration and factoring it, then the problem starts to look different, right? It's like, instead of asking Kustomize, how do I pull the image tag from an environment variable, Kustomize just defines the image tag the way it does today, which is as a field a customization YAML. But there's a separate tool that substitutes it in, and that tool can substitute things arbitrarily, not just in the image field, but in other pieces, right? And then I think this actually allows a lot more flexibility in how we combine these pieces. So that is the context for, hey, there's stuff that seems very different from Kustomize that we're building inside the Kustomize repo. What is the context around that? And the context is really, how can we build things that pair with Kustomize well, that might solve problems that otherwise Kustomize would have to build native support for.
So if I were to, I think that makes sense to me. So if I were to sort of say that back to you, and you can tell me if I'm understanding it right or wrong, the config work is geared around making hooks for external tooling to participate in sort of the substitution process and set things up so that then Kustomize can continue to do what it does today in taking that data and customizing the documents with it.
Yeah, and I'd say it's not. Again, it is, yes, all that is that's right on, right? And the one thing I just want to clarify is that it is not exclusively to that particular problem. In the sense, it is, I think, looking at a separate layer which Customize would benefit from having, but isn't just Customize, right? You can imagine you don't want to use Customize, or you're not ready to use Customize yet, or you're not using Customize for this one piece. Then the substitution may, if it's in a separate tool, you can still substitute values in, right?
But how would you define a criteria to determine, when we looked at, I work with Matt, so when we looked at Customize, a lot of times we find ourselves deciding, well, we can do this if we write our own custom plugin, right? For Customize. So some plugin that does what we want it to do the replacement and do whatever generic CR replacement, whatever. But so now we see all this config and all this function stuff. So where would you draw the line of when is something, oh, you should go down the line of creating your own plugin for that function? And, we can talk to Customize, see if whatever we're talking about is generic enough that would even fit within the Customize repo or marketplace of plugin or whatever you call it. Versus, you should look at the config and forget about your custom plugin. Is there such a line? Or on the future, you're thinking that the plugins are just where they're at, and there's no more need for new plugins because you're doing this other approach?
If you don't mind, I'd like to answer that question by kind of giving you the architecture as I see it. And then each person, it's going to be a combination of taste and preference, effectively, and the specifics of the problem in most cases. The architecture, as I see it, is you essentially have 3 tools available to you, or 3 layers is maybe another way of looking at it. One layer is raw data factoring, right? And in this case, the way, so maybe if we take a specific problem indicate where it's like, I want to produce, I want to produce some reusable module, for instance, of configuration that for running an app type. One way of doing pure factoring to make that somewhat reusable is to have a base that has, effectively the app, and then users are provided some base set of customization YAML and patches. Those patches come predefined with kind of the stuff that you as the publisher of the reusable module would want to have people to override. So that might be the image if it's, module for running a particular language or something. If it's for running something like Prometheus, the image wouldn't necessarily be something you expose. You'd rather expose CPU and memory reservations or these sorts of things. But effectively, you can, through factoring just data, provide kind of to the end user a simplified version of the API that allows them to set different things. So that's just data, right? And that will get you so far, but that still means someone has to go in there and use their text editor and work with these APIs directly. And so that might not make sense and if you're in the case of, well, we want to give this to users, but really they should only be setting these 3 things, right? And really they have this nice workflow today where we have this platform we built where they just run these commands, right? Like set new version. So we provide to some team, here's the way you run your app, and then they just set CPU, set replicas, set resources, and set CPU memory, maybe the image tag and the replicas, you could imagine, right? And these are the things then they get this experience. Hey, guys. Okay. Then they get this experience, they may want this experience where those are provided as higher level for them, right? And so, and maybe they want to do it from the CLI, and they want to do it possibly from scripts or automation. They want to automate this as part of a CI/CD system. So this is something where just the factoring alone won't do a great job. And this is one area where people start to say, oh, I want to be able to pull it from this environment. I want to pull it from these other areas so that I can hook external sources into my configuration without using SED, is effectively the ask there. And those can be done in many cases through effectively looking at the schema and marking it up with metadata. And so you can say something like, okay, here the schema of the object is this, and if I want to set the replicas, I can add to the schema a extension. Hey guys, Lissy, can you get out of here? I'm in the middle.
Want to get dressed in my room? My room. Get dressed in my room.
There we go.
Get dressed in my room.
Sorry. So this is one case where you can do a lot with the data in terms of being able to build other systems that hook in and can manipulate like high level notions. But that will only get you so far, right? Like you can actually go quite a ways with that. You can maybe substitute a value into a bunch of different fields as a string that's part of the whole field value, so just the part of the image tag versus the whole image or this sort of stuff. And you can wire it into a bunch of fields at once. And then maybe you could, we haven't done this yet, but you could imagine doing more sophisticated stuff like composing these things together, and this field is derived from that other field, and do it statically. But you don't, eventually you're going to get to the state where you basically create a DSL, right? And instead of just saying this value should be substituted with this other value, you're saying, okay, this value should be 2 times the value of this other value, right? Or something like that. Or you need to create resources or delete resources or do something like remove a field entirely, or make sure that other stuff that you just can't easily express through metadata is done. And that's where you need to then write some program which is going to directly modify the configuration. And this is this is what plugins are. The one I just described is effectively what we're looking at with config setters. And plugins are a restricted, so they're not like a full run your own binary to do whatever you want. They actually have a restricted view that says, and mirrors effectively what the controllers in the Kubernetes cluster does, which is you can read and write resources, right? With a controller queries the Kubernetes API or uses the Informer watch cache to get a collection of resources. Then it looks at them, makes some decisions, and then writes some resources back to the cluster, right? And so what we're looking at is, okay, that model works pretty well. It is basically, we've been able to implement everything in Kubernetes that we need to implement just using that model, plus, I guess, webhooks and a couple other pieces composed with it, right? But the notion of reading and writing resources as the way you implement complex systems has held up pretty well. And so this is the same model plugins use. It's just the inputs and outputs are a bit different. Plugins, for customize, use they read from partially customized resources, and then they emit back out to customize. And so these actually end up are invoked as part of the customized build process. And so those would be used like if you need to do something like create a new resource, remove a resource, do deep structural changes to resources, plugins are going to be your friend there, especially if you want to do stuff specialized for your system. Functions are something that we are looking at as a growing out of plugins and saying, okay, the model is actually really, I think, solid here for taking that API, for taking that model of the controller model, but applying it to configuration files. And it can be used for actually much more than just in the context of a customized build. It can be used to actually, as part of a CI/CD system, to validate the output of customize after it's been customized. For instance, you can apply kubeval, right, as kind of an example of something we've been looking at having a function for. I think we have a function for it already. They could write back to the package, right? So the same way a controller writes back to the API server, it reads from the API server and writes the API server. You can imagine having a function that normalizes your package, right? And you say, okay, run the function against, or when I say package, I effectively mean directory of configuration. So it normalizes a directory of configuration, which includes maybe a customization YAML itself. And so you could write like meta functions, right, that operate on customization YAMLs and plug in values into the customization YAML from other sources or refactor customization YAMLs and that sort of thing. So this is where kind of functions look as making a more generic form of that architecture that could be plugged into a variety of different environments, of which customize would be one of, and you could write plugins as functions.
So a question then, and that helps. The model and API structs and things like that that are used today between sort of the core customize functionality and then the KYAML API and objects they're sort of different sets of objects that do similar kinds of things. You've outlined kind of two related but different use cases. Do you see them converging on a common model and API, or do you see them kind of continuing as is today?
No, I want to make, so let me know if, I'll try and answer this quickly because I'm not sure if it's exactly what you're asking. We've developed a bunch of libraries in KYAML, many of which are parallel to libraries in Kustomize. The libraries in KYAML are meant to replace the ones in Kustomize, and we are just starting now to do that migration. If you look in the PR list, I think the third one in the list is the first version of this. The libraries in Kustomize, and I'm talking about like the infrastructure libraries we use to build Kustomize now, are built on serializing resources through maps, Golang maps, for instance. So this is one example. And that drops all comments in structure. And so that means like when you run customize on something, it's going to just drop a bunch of stuff and reorder stuff in weird ways, and it won't look like what you put in to customize. The libraries in KYAML are built on the Go YAML libraries, the most recent version of them, which has primitives that allow you to manipulate comments and structure and the format, right? For instance, you get to choose, is it a flow look in YAML, or is it the one of the other? There's a bunch of different styles for how it's represented. So we are moving on to the first thing we're going to do is move on to the KYAML libraries. I would like to then follow up by moving on to the open API libraries. There's a bunch of libraries in KYAML for working with structure of objects and beginning to augment what Kustomize uses to determine where to substitute different things or add labels or add annotations with the actual schema, so we can actually look at fields and say, yep, this is definitely a label selector without hard coding it someplace else. There's a couple other pieces in Kustomize that I think as we migrate the Kustomize onto that infrastructure, it will begin to look, you'll have a much more higher fidelity output from Kustomize.
Okay. So to sort of give you a little context into where my question was coming from too, like I think the way that you outlined the different use cases earlier, at least for kind of our interest right now, I think we're more concerned with what we think of at least as being those core factoring kinds of concerns rather than integrating to external systems and environmental injection and things like that. But we'd like to do some additional just operations from a substitution standpoint that aren't, at least not yet, supported out of box with Kustomize, which is part of what drew us to that replacement transformer plugin, which today is kind of packaged up as an example. It wasn't quite clear to us whether that was on sort of a trajectory to become an built-in plugin functionality, or if it was going to be reworked into a, from sort of a POC to something else. So what we kind of did as just an exploratory step was to take that plugin and then wrap it up as a function and map from the function KYAML inputs and outputs to the customized inputs and outputs that the plugin expects. And so, if I was kind of interpreting what you're saying correctly, if there's a separate question of whether we'll need to maintain a separate plugin for that kind of plugin functionality, right? For that substitution functionality. But if we did go that direction, then the more future-proof sort of interface for it might be the KYAML approach, even because eventually that will become the same language that will be spoken by the plugins as well, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're going to keep backwards compatibility for the plugins, or at least there's like a deprecation policy. So we're not going to like pull out the rug from under people. But the KYAML one is the one you're probably going to want to be on. We're never going to be able to support keeping structure and comments with plugins, because plugins are going to drop all that stuff during serialization, for instance.
Yeah. Cool. That makes sense. Then I guess the follow-on question is for that specific example of the replacement transformer. And one of the things that we like the best about it is the tree substitution or replacement that it does. Do you have specific plans from a plugin or a function or any other or built-in kind of standpoint for that kind of functionality with Kustomize?
Not in the short term. Like this is definitely an area we want to dig into, but I think the next 3 months are going to look like trying to get everything on the same set of infrastructure and address getting it on KYAML, getting coup control updated, hopefully with the latest version of Kustomize, so they're on the same version. Maybe fixing up the API documentation on the website and doing some different things like that. I think once we've addressed some of the technical debt we've accrued over the past few years, that would be a better time to start looking at expanding the API surface.
Gotcha. Cool. No, that makes sense. And of course, anything we do on a substitution functionality, we would try to do in a generic and reusable way that would align to our best understanding of what Kustomize wants or how it's going to be oriented in the future, so it could be reused by others or integrated in the future in some way.
I think I'd love if it'd be great maybe to schedule something, let's say in 2 months, and begin talking about like your experiences with the transformer plugin. Mm-hmm. And then maybe we could start thinking about what would make sense to have Kustomize support built in, and maybe tease apart the use cases and things you've learned and what worked with it and what didn't. And then once it's built into the Kustomize API, it becomes very difficult to change in a way that breaks backwards compatibility, and it becomes difficult to introduce better ways of doing the same thing because people get confused about which way is the right way. And so we found that in the past, when we've expanded the API surface, that it was a challenge if we didn't really understand what we're doing. So maybe visiting in 2 months and figuring out like what from your experience worked with the transformer and what didn't would be a good thing to do.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. Any other comments on that topic? I know I spent a lot of time talking about that, so I'd like to hear from some other people. Would it be helpful for me to write a doc on this?
Yes.
Definitely.
Okay, I'll do that. I'll make some pictures too.
I heard somebody had a question.
Okay, speak up if you have a question.
Yeah, maybe briefly, but what do you have an initial idea of how you might like compose secret data with Kustomize?
Great question. Secrets are actually something that's been really, there's not a single agreement on what the right way is. I think I've talked to a lot of people who have a lot of different opinions, and this is one area where we're hesitant to do much more for now, because there's so many ways of doing it. One of the ways that I've heard is effectively don't store secrets, like just manage secrets completely separately from everything else. You should have like a separate system entirely. This is not me, by the way, endorsing this. I take no opinion on this, but it's one thing that I've been told, right, is, or people have suggested, like, just do it in a separate system because that data you manage differently, right? Whereas like your configuration, you do a weekly release where you update the image tag. Your password for your database has a totally different model and set of people who should be mucking around with that. But that's more work, and there's a bunch of questions there. Kustomize does have support for secrets to some degree. It kind of depends on what your tolerance for the risk associated with using those mechanisms is.
Gotcha. Yeah, thank you. It's helpful to know how you're thinking about it. Thanks.
Okay, we have like 3-4 minutes left. And I've noticed that Sean added a topic. Sean, you want to talk about it quickly?
Yeah, actually, this won't take long. I just wanted to point out to the SIG a PR which, while it looks very simple, it may actually make our kube control code more reusable. And just to give a quick background, if you wanted to, for instance, use some of the kube control code in a controller, one of the simplest ways would be to create the options associated with that command and then fill in the option struct, maybe with a complete and validate command, and then call run on that options. So as it stands now that we have all of our kube control code, or most of it anyway, in staging, and it is eligible to be reused, one of the slight problems is that we've tightly coupled these options with CLI code, with Cobra code. And so if you look at some of the apply options complete, it actually takes in a parameter which is Cobra related. And it may be that we don't want, we're not building a CLI, and so that might not make sense. It may be that in your controller you want to create these options, fill them in, and then call run. And what I'm proposing, and what I think that we may do some refactorings for, is to decouple this Cobra code from the options, so that these options are more pure and more reusable. And so the PR that I put the link into in the doc, it shows an example of it. It's a very pretty simple PR. We may not even want to use that particular method of doing it, but the idea behind it is, let's get the Cobra code out of the options. Maybe any of the options should not have a dependency on Cobra, is basically what it is.
There's another similar example. I'll have a look at the PR later today or tomorrow. But we have a similar example with the wait command. Wait is an alpha command that allows you to wait for something to happen, like a condition to appear on an object or for the deletion of an object. And actually, we are using the primitives of the wait inside of the delete command. So if you have a look at the wait and delete command, I'll link them in the agenda right after below this this piece where Sean mentioned. This will be the target that we should be going towards. But yeah, definitely the split of Cobra and option is the way to go for.
Okay, great. Yeah, I wanted to get hoping to get the feedback from you guys from the SIG. Cool. Thanks.
Okay, we will skip send ups this time because it's already top of the hour. Thank you very much. Stay safe and have a good one. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.